All right, welcome everybody to the Inner Carnivore Podcast, episode 11, with my special guest, Isabel Lopez. Before we get started, no matter where you're listening to this from, whether you're streaming on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, or watching the full video on YouTube, if you could do a huge favor, hit that like button, subscribe, leave a review, comment, share it with friends and family. It really, really helps us out. So jumping right in, how are you doing, Isabel?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Super glad to get you on here for a number of reasons. A couple being that even though like the name of the podcast is Carnivore, and I know you're kind of a mix between, I believe it's keto and carnivore. I think a lot of these things are intertwined, and so I love getting people that maybe lean one way or the other to give people perspective and different avenues with which they can go.
Mm-hmm.
So segueing into that, how long have you been doing this, and where do you kind of fall in that spectrum of keto, carnivore, paleo, whatever?
So personally, I lean a lot more towards carnivore now, but my journey started as paleo, which is why my handle is Paleo Lola, because I was completely paleo for years, maybe like 10 years before I started dabbling with keto and then eventually practically carnivore. And so, yeah, I mean, I had incredible trend. I guess not physical. Yeah, I had an amazing transformation with paleo. Just in the sense that I have always been very focused on nutrition and health and fitness, but I wasn't very well educated as most people are at the beginning. And so I didn't feel well, right? I was always achy. I ran a lot. I did a lot of running and I was always in pain and bloated and gassy and constipated. And so I never really understood what was going on until I started learning about paleo. And then that's when everything started changing and things started getting so much better. And I just became really aware of the importance of food in everything, pretty much.
What, for people who aren't, I'm not super familiar, I could probably give a pretty close guess. What are the main differences between paleo and carnivore?
Vegetables. Paleo is, pretty much no grains. So there's a lot more in common with carnivore than not, I guess you could say, because, there's no grains involved, no sugar, or no processed sugar, no legumes. The diet is mainly focused around, or should be mainly focused around, protein, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, berries.
Gotcha. And what prompted you going from more paleo focused to more carnivore focused like you are currently?
I think it's just you evolve. I think that's how I always see it as, is like I have evolved from paleo to carnivore. And it wasn't anything in particular that prompted me to like go for it. It's more of I educate myself, right? I do a lot of reading. I'm interested. And so I hear about things and I study them and then I try it if it sounds like something that I'm interested in, I would like to try. And then if I like it, it continues that way. And so I ended up here through, going from paleo. I mean, eventually I realized that when I was paleo, I was keto. I realized that when I was at doing paleo correctly, I was in ketosis. Eventually, when I learned about keto, I was like, oh, these are all the same things I was already doing. And I was feeling all of these things. That must have been, I must have already been paleo. So I know that keto can really intersect very much with paleo and then, of course, with carnivore. So the main differences are just that carnivore is pretty much just meat. In my book, it also includes a little bit of other things, right, as spices. If you enjoy like cilantro on your food and things like that, I still think that's carnivore.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I've had a couple keto people. It seems that a lot of carnivores start somewhere on the low carb spectrum. It seems more common to me that people, started keto or started paleo and then kind of morph their way of eating into that. And one thing you touched on that I think is super important, and it's something I hear over and over, is doing research and like reading up on stuff. And for people who are just starting, so that can be a tall task, right? I mean, you have Harvard coming out saying that red meat causes diabetes, and then you have Oxford coming out saying red meat causes heart disease, and then you have, other studies coming out saying that red meat consumption is associated with longevity, and you're like, so for somebody who's done a lot of it, and I know you've done, speaking engagements and you coach, and where do you start with research and how do you not get overwhelmed? Because I can go on PubMed and look at 10 million, it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but pretty much every nutritional study that's ever been done, I have access to. How do you start that research process without getting completely overwhelmed?
Man, I don't know how you start that research project. I can tell you what I did and what led me here, and it was never like, I don't know, like it was over time, really. And also, the one thing that got me started was Marxism. The what is it? The Primal Blueprint. That's the first book that I ever read that took me in this direction. And I have always, I will always go back to that book as my basis. If I ever completely went off the rails and off track and my life started to spiral when it comes to my health and fitness, I would always go back to this book and start over from there. Because I think that, it's paleo, but if a person just eliminated processed foods and drink and, sugary drinks and all of that and started going paleo the right way, because there's a lot of ways to screw up paleo, they would make a huge impact on their health. Their lives would completely change. And so I think that that's where I would start. I wouldn't start on research papers because, for starters, I wouldn't have known how to read them at the time, how to understand them. So that's not where I would have started. I would have definitely started, I would have started by reading a book, which is what I still do now. And then also, not to put myself out there, but by hiring a coach, right, that can also help you in understanding, this part of the research is wrong for these reasons, but still encourage you to, do your own research. Because at the end of the day, we can say veganism is bad and nobody should do it. But what if one person did better on that one diet, right? And so, even though most likely not, there's just, everybody has their own journey and they need to have a place to start of their own. I think that that's where I would have started. That's where I did start. And, over time, I was able to expand on my knowledge of how do I feel, right? How does it make me feel physically, right? And listen to myself, because there's a lot of people that will tell you that, fat is bad for you and red meat is bad for you. And it's like, okay, well, how can you say that to me when I feel so much better than I did when I was vegan, at the beginning? I was vegan for 4 months, by the way. So you can't really, it's an argument that's difficult to have with somebody who hasn't experienced it.
I totally agree. There's 2 points I want to touch upon. It is that research thing I think is super important. I think people need to find something or someone, whether it's a book or a person. That's the cool thing about social media, is you can usually find somebody that you resonate with. And from a philosophical standpoint, you can understand why they do that diet or why they eat that way and how that applies to you. And so I always go back to Paul Saladino, and I know a bunch of people in the carnivore community don't like him. They think he's, gone too far off the rails, which is fine. Like, I started this knowing that he was quirky is my word for him. Like, he's a little out there, and that's fine. Right. I think if everybody could be, independently wealthy and live in Costa Rica and surf every day, then we could probably eat whatever we want. Yeah. But anyway, but listening to his stuff, that resonated with me and I could understand it. I'm like, okay, I can understand.
Or really quick.
Yeah, good.
There's a lot of movement downstairs, and I don't know if you can hear all the doors slamming going on.
No, you're totally fine. Okay. Yeah, I can resonate with his message and why he thinks the way he thinks, and especially about eliminating plants and seed oils. And so I think I listened to that. I'm like, okay, like that makes sense. Like I can understand that. Now from there, let's see what else there is in regards to that. And then I can, see some research. And for anybody out there, I don't recommend just going after studies because studies are super confusing. And unless you've seen a bunch, or unless you can quickly pick up not only the method of which they collect their information, but how they come to their conclusions, it's super easy just to be like overwhelmed. Yeah. And for anybody who's wondering what that means, the Harvard study that just came out about red meat and diabetes is the perfect example. Okay. To start, like, and I've talked about it a little bit, but I'll just break it down real quick. To start, how they collected their information is a food questionnaire, which is not, so this spans, it's like 30 years it spanned. And the food questionnaire changed partway through that study. But the food questionnaire, at the basis of it, is you send it out to people and they fill out how many times have I eaten this amount of food on a daily, weekly, monthly basis over the last, it was like 2 years. They would send it every 2 years to people. I don't remember what I ate last week. Yeah. Like I eat a pretty simple diet. I can tell you some kind of meat, but I couldn't tell you how much. And so not only that, but also you have to look at the categories and how they categorize everything. And the red meat category includes sandwiches. And if I go get, a supersized Big Mac meal at McDonald's and lasagna and pasta. And so then you sit back and go, okay, so the data you're collecting, you're trying to make this correlation. You're trying to prove correlation causation based on this very thin amount of data.
Flexible data.
Yeah. And it's tough because when they first released that, I don't know if you read like the abstract. So when they first published it, it wasn't available unless you had institutional access. And the summary and abstract that they had was the least informative thing I've ever read in my life. Yeah. I was like, you literally gave me no information. You just said red meat's bad.
Yeah, that's all it says, pretty much.
And so I got the full study from a buddy of mine that's at Harvard, and I read through it, and I was like, this is like, how can you publish this? Like, I don't have to be a medical professional. I don't have to be a doctor to know that this is the thinnest thing I've ever seen. So it can be super overwhelming because that's what you read. You read CNN articles, you read Daily Mail articles, and you're like, oh gosh. So I think that's a great point, is finding somebody that you can resonate with, start to look into their stuff. Maybe you can start trusting what they say. And then if you really want to go into studies, then you can start poking around.
Yeah. Once you're kind of more once you know what you're doing. I mean, like you said, that I think that's the main point would be find somebody that you resonate with, that you can trust, and learn from them. Right? Start applying it to yourself. Start changing your lifestyle habits, what you do on a daily basis, exercise, all these things. And then over time, start poking around in research as you learn more and as you feel more comfortable with what you're doing. Because if you're just starting off, it's like way too much going on for you to really go that route. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's where I have a big problem when people are sounds weird put in a sentence, anti-anecdotal evidence. That's a huge one, right? Anecdotal evidence doesn't matter. That's literally all that matters when you personally are picking out food. Like that's the only thing that matters. Because guess what? If you have a deathly allergy to peanuts and somebody's like, peanut butter is the only way to get healthy, it's not going to work well for you. Like, it doesn't matter what the studies say. Like, you have to find something that works for you. And that's where I think it's super important to just start. And you brought up the point of remove the processed foods. Like, just start simple. Like, remove processed foods, remove seed oils, remove, excess sugar. Stop drinking your calories.
Yeah. And honestly, like the seed oil point is so important. Like I've had clients who, this one client in particular, who's like, I can't eat meat. It's like, why are you even talking to me at this point? I
Do
can't
you
eat meat.
know who I am?
I can't eat meat. It makes me very, very sick. I can eat chicken. And I'm like, okay, why can't you eat meat? It's like every time I eat meat, like I feel really sick. I'm like, okay, when you've eaten meat, is it always just a steak by itself, like nothing else, maybe some salt? I don't know. Okay. At home, have you ever made a steak at home with not any oil? No. Okay. This is what you need to do. Okay. All of your experience that you're telling me about right now is like at restaurants. You don't know what kind of oil they're using, even for a steak. A lot of times, there's most likely some sort of oil on the pan of some sort, probably. I said, so you need to cook a steak by yourself at home. Don't use anything else, maybe some butter, but not even that because I think someone was dairy intolerant or something. And then tell me how you feel. And it's like that one time changed her entire life. Like she was saying that since she was a child, meat made her sick. Always, her entire life. But this one time that I had her try meat, making sure that there was no seed oils involved, now she can eat meat. It's like mind blowing to me how people, how can you not have even had that experience before in your life or not made that connection? Or like, how does, how are you that disconnected from your body too?
That's so I know that exact example. And people, that's honestly probably from people who are not carnivore, that's probably the one area that people will start to label you as a little out there is when you bring up seed oils, right? And it's even the term like sounds like I'm about to get up on my soapbox and start preaching now. And people just like, oh gosh, like just don't. But you cannot tell me that there's not, because I have that exact experience, not from getting sick, and I never got sick before, but I eat a lot of meat, right? And I cook a lot of steak, and I can eat 2 pounds of ribeye, right, in one sitting and feel totally fine.
Yeah.
Like get up and go about my day and have no bloating and no negative consequences whatsoever. I was at a restaurant probably 6 months ago, and I was like, when I go out, for anybody that's listening, I am not super strict about when I go out because I'm not like that's just a headache for me, and I would rather not go out than try and figure out how to navigate. So I don't go out very often anyway, but if I'm going to, it's usually probably going to be like some sort of social event or date, and I'm just going to plan on not eating super strict. I'll just eat as best as I can,
Same.
and I'll make do. So I'm like, I'm gonna have a steak. I get a steak, literally only eat the steak, and within 5 minutes of finishing, I was like bloated.
Wow.
And I was like, oh man, like didn't get sick, didn't, have any bad, but just took me back to all my times dieting previous where right after you eat, you bloat, you have the stretchy pants, you're like, oh man, I need just give me a minute. I'll be all right. And then, you don't do anything for 30 minutes to a half an hour because you have to let it digest. Like it's like the don't swim after 30 minutes after eating, right? It's like I gotta let it digest because I'm so bloated that I don't feel like doing anything.
Yeah.
And that was literally all I ate was a steak. And no, I don't know what they cooked it in, but I know for a fact it's not like they're not back there with some Wagyu tallow. Like it's right. I know they just, went to Castrol motor oil and like grabbed something to throw it on the grill.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's until you would experience that, like you don't understand. And then you realize that if I focus on removing seed oils, this is why I bring it up a lot. Because if you focus on removing it, you will be amazed at how much processed foods you don't eat.
Yeah.
Because you go like this and you're like, well,
No.
not using that seasoning. Nope. Not using that product. Nope. Not like so many things. And that's just the super easy way to just be able to look at something and go, I'm not going to eat it because I know it's processed.
It's in everything. It's just annoying, really. And, I've had times when I see, and I'm sure it happens to everyone, where I'm like, oh, this looks healthy. I'm going to try it because it looks good. And I buy it. And for whatever reason, I didn't look at the ingredients and I come home and just to see, the thing is, I already know the moment I look at the ingredients list, I'm not going to be able to eat that thing anymore because in my head, I'm like, hell no. Right. So, and here I am, I'm like looking at this product. I'm like, okay, here I go. Flip it around. And it's like, damn it. Why did I look? I know I'm not going to eat it once I look. Why did I even buy it? Why didn't I look in the store? I was trying not to look probably because right. And that's because that's how it is with pretty much any product you find out there. I mean, there are some good stuff. Obviously, there's lots of good products out there. You have to, you already know what they are, first of all, right? Like you go looking for that specific product because you already know what it is. And you won't find it that easily. It's not just anywhere. You're not just going to go to the grocery store and find it most of the time. Some grocery stores, but not all of them.
It's a super good point. Like I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I started using, before I went carnivore, I started using a seasoning brand that had really good seasonings. And they were pretty basic. Like they were like a garlic, salt, pepper mixture. They had like a buttery steakhouse one, like a buttery poultry blend.
The Kinder?
Yes, there it is. Then they started carrying them at Costco, and I was like, sold. So I had like 10 of these things. I was like, put it on everything. And I started carnivore, and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, there's seed oils in these seasoning? Like, you've got to be joking me. And I'm to the point where this is not a new thing for me. Like, I was a trainer for a long time, worked with a lot of people. And my number one thing was always to get rid of processed foods. So that's, since I've been in health and fitness, it's always been processed foods. I was like, you have to get rid of processed foods because there's no way that you're going to be healthy and or accomplish what you want eating a whole bunch of processed foods. Like it's just almost impossible. And so I would rather have added sugar to something than seed oils. Because most of the time I can at least justify that sugar is like, and for people out there, I don't actually. Like there's also another seasoning in there that doesn't have seed oils, but it does have sugar in it. And I was like, seriously, why does my salt mixture have sugar in it?
Yeah, that's ridiculous, right?
But seed oils are so processed. Like if you have not looked at, like this is not a conspiracy, like go look how seed oils are made. Like go look at the biohazard waste products that are created. Go look at bleaching clay. Bleaching clay that's used in the end process of making your refined seed oils literally have to be put in landfills because they are toxic, hazardous materials.
And that's ridiculous.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh man. So I feel like as soon as I start getting on this rant, I'm like, oh, people are like, there's the crazy guy talking about these seed oils.
I wish, like you and a few other people, you're so outspoken about your beliefs, and that's fantastic. I really love. I wish that I was more like that. I hold back a lot, but I think that your outspokenness about your beliefs is the reason that you do so well. Is because you're black or white. This is what it is. There is no like this and that. And for like when I coach people, I always give them the option of starting with paleo. And I always hope to eventually get them closer to carnivore, if not carnivore, maybe at least keto. But part of me wishes that I was just like, nope, that's not what it is. It's this. I just, feel that people need a little bit of segue, I guess. You know what I mean? Like start somewhere and have their own journey to enlightenment. But yeah, like I think that that's why I start them at paleo. I also feel like I don't want to freak people out by going carnivore and pushing the steak and all that stuff constantly. But I wish I was more like that. I definitely wish I was more like, all the time.
So that's super funny because when I started, I was like, I don't want to be like that because like that's my personality, right?
That's just
And when I first started, I was like, all right, I'm going to try and be like even keel. Like I'm not going to try and bring. I still don't try and bring like politics or lifestyle stuff. Like, and it's not because I'm afraid of like saying what I believe. It's because I don't want that headache of like I'll argue about veganism. I'm not trying to.
you
I
are
10 years ago, I argued about politics, and you know what? That makes me just want to do stuff that I'm not going to say on recorded video. So I was like, I just don't anymore. I'm like, you know what? Just believe whatever you want. I don't care. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that, but I'm also not going to try and be like inflammatory. I'm just, going to post my stuff and try and be positive. And it honestly, so I had a couple aha moments, but there was a couple like videos that other people posted that went like crazy. And I was like, why am I
Here we
doing
go.
this? Like, yeah. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to be me. But there's only a couple things that I really am like, absolutely not. I don't think. And I've actually got into it a couple of times with carnivore because for the longest time, I'm slowly getting away, but for the longest time, I've eaten fruit and honey.
Mm-hmm.
And that's still something that I will go back and forth with about how bad is it actually for you to eat one banana a day
Mm-hmm.
or have one serving of fruit and one serving of honey. Like I'll go back and forth that all day long because I think there's a balance there. But things like eating a ton of vegetables and seed oils and a bunch of processed foods, no matter what the food is, I don't care. That's something that I'm like, that's like my non-negotiable, and I don't think anybody should do it.
Yeah.
So those are the ones I stick to, and that's where like eat a steak came in. But
I think,
when
sorry.
no, go ahead.
Well, when you were saying about the whole banana and honey thing, I honestly don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think that where it matters is where, like if you have, for me anyway, body composition goals is where that can make or break your. And I know that a lot of carnivores don't count macros. I don't know if you do. I do. I feel better that way, knowing, and not always. Like sometimes I'll take a break, but I already know, like, how to eat, how much to eat, all that stuff. Um, but I do think that when a person has body composition goals, that's where you get more into that nitty gritty of like, well, the honey's going to throw my macros off, or that kind of thing. For the most part, like health wise, and if you're not a person who the sweetness in the sugar in the banana or in the honey makes you want more, then you're fine. But if you're the person who you put some honey in your coffee and next thing you know, you're looking for donuts, then that's where the problem comes in. So you just kind of have to learn to get to know yourself. What kind of person are you? How do you deal with these things? Like I'm an all or nothing person. I can't have stuff in my house. I don't have junk food because I will sneak to it. You know what I mean? Or if there is, right, because I have a husband and a son who mostly like me, but they're not as strict as I am. Or at least they're more able, my husband at least, is more able to, he's more of the type that says, I want to have the option. And if he has the option, then he makes the right choice. But if he does not have the option, then he's pissed and he's going to go make the wrong choice. You know what I mean? So he needs to have that option in his life, whereas I need to not have option in my life. So we kind of have to figure things out when it comes to that stuff. And let's say if there is something in the house that I don't want to eat, he already knows, like, let's just keep it where it's not gonna be in my, thoughts, where I'm gonna forget that it exists, where I'm not gonna know it's in the house. And then I'll be okay. But if I'm constantly seeing it, at some point I might have some. And then that might take me to So where like the banana and the honey thing, I stay away from it completely because I'm more likely to want more, you know. So it just depends on the person, I think.
100%. I think that's a super important point. And I've a couple people who, one who's lost, almost 200 pounds now. And he's very real with himself and is like, I'm addicted to food. And he's like, I very much treat this like an alcoholic would alcohol. And you don't take an alcoholic to a bar, or you don't say, hey, it's okay, just have half a shot. Like, it's not as bad as one shot. Just try half a shot. It's fine.
And you
He's
wouldn't
like,
say
no, because like,
at all.
right. And people cannot make that connection where they're just like, oh, just have one, just live a little. He's like, no, you don't understand. Like, that is going to lead me down here. And for those people, I'm like, absolutely, get it out. Don't touch it. Like, that is not something you want at all. Just like you would handle, a drug addict or an alcoholic, like, get it out. Don't have it in the house. Don't even tempt yourself. Another one who's, had problems with binge eating, and peanut butter is the trigger, which I can relate to. Like, I would sit down and eat peanut butter like it's going out of crazy. And it's not like it's in my house. I can, not eat it, but I can relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very important point, is to understand where you are and, have somebody help you understand what your triggers are.
Mm-hmm.
What I really got into like this when I first started carnivore, and quite frankly, I was like, man, like, I don't know how this is going to go, because when I first started, I really took a lot of offense to all of the posts where they're like, sugar is sugar, bread is sugar, fruit is sugar, all of this, it's all the same. And I'm like, you can say it's all the same, and like we can get technical about how it gets broken down, but you eating a loaf of white bread is not the same as me eating an apple. Like, we're not going to go down this road, and you're trying to like nitpick and do these, inflammatory posts to basically trigger people, and people that don't know what you're talking about, like, believe this, and they like eat it up, and they're like, oh my gosh, carbs are going to kill me. That's for another time. But so that's I got into that a lot with carnivore, because I do eat a little bit of fruit, and I don't consider animal based, because animal based, like as Paul Saladino would do it, is a lot more. Like, he eats quite a bit of fruit.
Yeah.
And so I've always like towed this line, and as I'm going through, I'm finding that I do a little bit better, and I don't need that little bit of fruit. So I'm starting to like go away from it. It took me quite a while. I mean, I'm over a year now, but it's knowing yourself and knowing how your body reacts and what.
When it, like Paul Saladino, for example, I know when he first started, he was strict carnivore, no fruit or honey or anything like that. But that's where we go back to, like, you have to get to know yourself, how your body reacts and how your body feels. I remember somewhere I heard him talk about how he was feeling very cold all of the time when he was carnivore, and his energy levels weren't very, so he started using a little bit of carbohydrates in the form of, I guess, honey. I think it was at first, or maybe it was honey and fruit. And so he got to the point where he realized, like, to him, he needed carbohydrates, and he still kept it like, I mean, I guess you could say it's not really even paleo. I guess it's just animal based, right? Um, because he does eat a lot of carbohydrates from honey and fruit. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that, again, it's about how he reacts, how he feels. Like, I feel very, very, very good eating only meat, right? Like, I can get up off the table, and it was an experience. When I first experienced it, it was surreal, because I didn't know that you could sit down and eat a meal as large as the one that I had just eaten and not even feel like a sugar insulin spike, not feel bloated, not feel sleepy, right? Because the sleepy thing is like, you ate and you get up from the table and you're like, oh, that was the usual, like, after lunch crash every time. And I didn't know that you could experience no change. Like, not a little bit of change. I mean, zero change in energy levels, in bloatedness, in anything at all, until I experienced it. Right. And so I have gotten to know myself. And then, I have since eaten bread. I have since, eaten rice. Maybe not. I don't really like it, but maybe I have. I don't remember. I'm sure, like at some point, I've had bites of things, and I know how that makes me feel in myself, in my stomach, especially, right? Like I can immediately tell that I'm not feeling great with the food that I just ate. So, above all things, how you feel is the number one factor about of whether or not you should continue to do something. Because if steak's going to kill you in 20 years, but you felt great, fantastic for 20 years, well, then go ahead, right? Like you lived a great 20 years. But if you cut out meat and let's say you go vegan and you live 20 sucky ass years, I'll take the steak, death by steak any day.
That I literally said the exact same thing on one of the episodes. I was like, you know what? I'm not saying that meat's going to kill you. I'm not saying that meat's going to shorten your lifespan. I'm not saying that whatsoever. But if you tell me that, okay, so got to get an appropriate number of years. So if you tell me I have 50 years left, right? And I go back to eating the exact same way. If I go back to eating how I was before, which was pretty healthy, like I didn't eat processed foods, but I would like try to get my veggies in. I didn't really care about seed oils. I cooked most of my own food. But if you tell me to,
all the time.
yeah, no, 100%. So if you tell me to go back eating like that and I will live 50 more years, or I can eat the way I'm eating now and I'm only going to live 40 more years, sign me up for 40 more years right now. Like it's not even close because guess what? Once that's the aha moment for a lot of people is you're telling me I can eat and I don't bloat.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't feel bad. Like I don't have to schedule my meals around because I don't want to feel bad. If I'm going to go do something, I would eat, 2 hours before because, I wanted to feel okay by the time I went out there. And for anybody out there, it wasn't like debilitating, right? It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I have to stay at my house. It's that bloat.
Yeah, immediately after.
Right. Yeah. It's that bloat. Like it's the bloating and it's the, okay.
Mhm.
It's the nap after Thanksgiving dinner. Like that that's supposed to be normal. Like everybody, if you pulled all of America, I bet 95% of people would be like, yeah, it's just normal. It's
Yeah,
just a process of eating.
yeah.
And so that listening, and that's one of the reasons I still follow Paul Saladino. I still support what he does. I may not agree with everything, which is fine, but I still have a lot of respect for Saladino because he's out there on record saying, if vegan is what's going to make you the best, most healthy, thriving self, then do it.
Mhm.
It's like, I honestly don't care if it's animal based or carnivore or vegan. Like, just want people to like be healthy and thrive. He's like, now, do I think that's going to happen? Probably not.
Mhm.
But if you're the case, and I'll tell people that, man, if you pick a standard American diet or veganism, choose veganism, healthy veganism, not this like I eat Oreos because it's veganism.
Yeah.
But it's not about like, oh, you have to do this or you have to do that or you have to be this diet or you have to be that diet. Like, I just want people to be healthy.
Mhm.
And once you realize that you can do this and feel this way, you want other people to do it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really that simple. You want other people to feel good. What you were saying about being bloated and having something to do afterwards. As a girl, man, it was like, don't eat today. I can't eat today because otherwise I won't fit in my dress. I can't eat today because otherwise my dress will be tight around my waist. Right. And now I can eat and put my dress on immediately. You know what I mean? Like it, and I'm not limiting my food intake, which is a big deal, right? Like most people think, well, you lose weight because you eat less. I'm not eating less. I'm probably eating more than I used to ever eat before. I worry about it much less. And the kind of food that I choose to eat because it's so limited, right? I only eat the choices are easy to make, right? I don't have all of these options. I have one option. I like it that way. It makes my life easy. And I can eat and enjoy my life. I can eat and go out. I can eat and do all the things. I don't have to eat and wait until my clothes fits again. I mean, I think that's a big deal for women for sure. You know, the fact that they feel bloated and having to unbutton your pants is the most horrible thing ever. I mean, we've all done it. We've all done it. I used to be, when I did veganism for like 4 months when I was in my early 20s, again, in my search, right, for improved health, for being stronger, for being all these things, it's had to start somewhere. And one of the first books that I read was, what was it called? Skinny Bitch.
I've heard, yeah. I know what book you're talking about.
Yeah. And it is, now I know, it is vegan propaganda to the max. Like, terrible, terrible. But that's where I started going vegan. And I suffered those 4 months, but I would go to Subway and get a sandwich with just some veggies, like no meat in it. And I felt so proud of myself for doing that. But immediately after, I had to unbutton my pants because I was so bloated. That doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't think you saw cavemen passing out from eating food by the fire, possibly getting attacked. Like, that's meant to happen.
Yeah, that is the one thing that I don't think you can tell people. Like, I'm not bloated afterwards. I'm like I don't think until you experience it.
Yeah.
Like, that's a really hard one to put into words for people because they're like, no, I don't ever have any bloating. I'm like,
you think, yeah, you're right. I think everybody feels bloated, but like every other symptom that we have, right? Like gas and acne and all of these things that have, I'm sure, gone away for you. Sure, you still have gas occasionally, but like to a very different extent from before. There's symptoms that we get so used to living with that we forget we have them. And I think for a lot of people, especially people who are very overweight, probably don't know the difference between being overweight and being bloated. So, and another one that I usually get a lot of like, they don't argue with me at the moment, but later they bring it up, is when I tell people like the brain fog. Mm-hmm. I bring up the brain fog, and that's a big one for me. And nobody believes me. And my clients will be like, oh my God, this girl what's wrong with her, right? Like, she's crazy. They won't say anything to me at the time until they experience what I was talking about. And they're like, oh my God, when you said this, I thought you were crazy, but now I get it. And I'm like, yes, now you get it. So you actually have to experience it. You have to be healthy before you know that you're not. Even when you think you're healthy, a lot of times you're not.
It's so true. And that's also why I've gotten more and more outspoken about a bunch of this, because I've, having done like bodybuilding in the past, I've gone to the extreme with a lot of things. And I've experienced like the brain fog that every bodybuilder has ever done can tell you, where 2 weeks out from a show, you literally just sit there like this.
Like a zombie.
And people are like, what's wrong? And I'm like, huh? I don't even know what planet I'm on right now. Like, I just know I'm trying to survive. And, and I've had a couple bodybuilding competitors and coaches who also competed. And as soon as you bring this up, like a light goes off and I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. It's the old adage bodybuilding thing where you wake up first thing in the morning, you take your progress pictures because that's the leanest you will be all day. And the moment you even look at water, you bloat. Like, literally, you just look at it and all of a sudden you bloat and you're like, argh! And when you are that lean, like a little bit of bloat is so noticeable. Like, it literally looks like I put on 20 pounds. Yeah. And I remember, and again, that's just normal. Like, you talk to people and they're like, yeah, it's normal. That happens. That's why you do all your stuff in the morning. That's why you like don't eat prior to a show. Like, it's just what you do. And then, just all of that stuff. And I'm like, okay, I can, and the gas, like that's that's like a gym bro rite of passage, like protein farts, right? They're like, oh, it's because you eat a whole bunch of protein. And it's just normal and it's accepted. And no, I hardly ever now.
Mhm.
And that one people cannot understand. You're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you don't understand. Like, if you just give this up, like your spouse, like I'm gonna start becoming a marriage counselor, and like the only thing I'm gonna do is instruct dudes to eat this way, and marriages are just gonna like divorce rate's gonna go down by 800%.
Yeah.
But yeah, until you know that, you would never know, right? You just think that that's normal. But yeah, it's
And
crazy.
certain spices and stuff like that in my food sometimes, depending, because like lately I've been obsessed with this animal-based chili that I've literally been making every week. But it does have like cumin and things like that. And this one hasn't even guess. There's been food that does, but the moment it happens, I'm like, okay, what was in that? Like, what did I put in it? Go back. What caused it? Because meat by itself will not do it.
Hmm.
And protein farts come from protein powder, I think, mostly, not meat. It's not meat, just protein powder.
Well, it's also the typical diet that you'll see with people who eat at the gym, which is chicken and broccoli, chicken and rice, chicken and green beans, ground turkey, and yeah. So it's not. And I still do protein powder. I've switched, so now I have all the protein powder I do is either single ingredient whey or single ingredient beef isolate, and there is something to be said for that, like supplements and there's a lot of really bad protein powders out there, which I'm sure are not contributing. But honestly, it's that diet where it's like, that's what everybody who's at the gym trying to get healthy, like they have a Tupperware with chicken and broccoli. Like they have a Tupperware with, and they try and get their greens down any way they can because they're virtually 0 calories and they fill you up. So you're like, wait a minute, I can like lower my caloric intake and like keep myself full and,
and bloated.
And bloated, right? And feel terrible. One thing I wanted to touch on is, so you work with a lot of women and specifically like getting them healthy and weight loss, right? Has your approach simplified with carnivore versus prior to carnivore? And I'll segue into this because I've worked with plenty of men and plenty of women. And as a trainer, a guy is super easy, right? You go like this, you go, stop eating that, start doing this, and they lose weight instantly. Yeah. Right. And then all of a sudden it's like 50 pounds and everybody's like, oh my gosh, that's the most amazing thing ever. Mm-hmm. And then you get a woman and you tell them to do the exact same thing. And she's like, I gained 10 pounds. And you're like, I don't understand. Like, I don't get this. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not telling people I haven't had success with women, because I have, but it's not nearly as simple. Yeah. No. Right. Has carnivore or paleo or low carb simplified that? Like, is it easier based on the diet, if that makes sense?
Well, for starters, I'll say this. Men, and I've worked with some men as well, and they are easier to work with by far than women. I have had success with all of the men that I have worked with, and they've been so easy to work with. Women have more baggage. There's a lot of emotional things going on when it comes to coaching a woman as well. A different kind of convincing to do things for yourself instead of skipping the gym because your family wants you to, I don't know, do something for them, right? Like, it's a different kind of thing. So, but I don't think, I haven't had experience where women gained weight when we started doing, whether it's paleo or keto or carnivore. If anything, they might be stuck at the weight, and that's where we struggle to get them down. But mostly it's because when I start working with somebody, I don't start them on macros, right? I start them on food changes, right? Going from eating this to eating these kinds of food. And so, number one, most women are under eating. And so when we start working together, they have to start eating more. And so it's a process to get them to do that. They don't want to eat more. They think they can't. They think they're going to gain weight. They're just scared to eat, period. And so I think that that's mainly where I struggle with women is getting them to eat. Eventually, when we do get into macros, they've already lost a good 10, 15 pounds by then. And then we start getting into macros, and that's what takes them down further, right? Like to what they really want. Because at some point, it does matter. It does matter, right? At some point, how much you eat begins to matter. And I learned that from, again, personal experience. For years, I didn't count any macros at all, and I couldn't get beyond a certain point. So at a certain point, it does end up mattering, especially maybe for women. Um, but that's where I struggle with women. It's not so much that they don't lose weight or that they gain weight. I haven't had the experience of them gaining weight. That would be really bad. But I have had the experience of them not losing weight. And it always boils down to them not actually doing the thing, right? Like, skipping breakfast all of the time. And I'm not saying you have to have breakfast at 8 in the morning, but you need to have a good first meal. And it's like, oh, well, I had a yogurt. Oh, well, I had, this. Stop it. You need to eat actual food and start with eggs and bacon, right? Or steak or something like that. So it's very hard to get them to eat food, to make the time to eat food. That's me. That's me.
I think that's a super important point, because a lot of, I don't want to make a generalization, but I do know personally a lot of women who have tried a bunch of diet plans, right? And all of my experience with coaching and training, just to clarify for people, is, 7, 8, 10 years ago, when, it was, your diet is get rid of crap food, get your carbs from rice, sweet potatoes, that kind of stuff. Like, we'll do calories, we'll do macros, we'll do all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So no, I don't, for anybody who's like slightly confused, I don't coach on carnivore. I don't. So any of my experience from that is all prior. But the undereating thing, I think, is huge. And I think what's really hard for people to grasp, and especially women, just because it's almost like a cultural difference, right? Like a guy takes pride in how much he can eat.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I hate this. A girl is like, I'm just going to like nibble on this stuff. And you're like, no, like just eat something.
Yeah.
But this way of eating and the whole like listening to your body, it helps you understand how much food you actually need to eat. Mm-hmm. And for some guys, they realize that maybe they don't need to eat as much food. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they realize that they are full without needing all of the extra stuff. And for a lot of women, they realize they need to eat more. Mm-hmm. Right. And so then you find that like homeostasis. And, talking with one of the bodybuilding coaches, he said the same thing. First, we don't count macros at all. Mm-hmm. Like, don't even care. We're eliminating stuff. We're like finding what works. Mm-hmm. And then when we want to get that next level of progress, then we start dialing it in. And so I think that's a super important point for people to understand. Like, the first is just figure out what your body responds to. Like, mm-hmm. figure out what you need to eat, how much you need to eat.
Learn to make changes, feel comfortable with the changes that you've made, get into the habit of making the right food choices. And then we'll worry about that. Because if you can't take the time to read a food label, how are you going to take the time to weigh and measure and track? That takes time. Like, I mean, it's easy for me now, but it took me years of frustration to like, oh my God, I have to weigh this food. Now, like sometimes I'm not even going to weigh, let's say I'm going to serve my cup of coffee and I put it on the scale and serve the coffee. And I'm like, why did I even put it on the scale? Right? Like I automatically do that now. But it took me years. Right. So if you can't take the time to read a food label, why are you going to be worrying about tracking food?
And I would that was the number one thing I got. And usually it's from people who are like friends or people that like you interact with. And they're like, hey, can you write me a diet plan?
Oh God.
Right. Can you write me? This was my response. And this is why it was so easy for me to transition. This was my response 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. I said, don't eat anything with more than 2 ingredients. And they're like, what can I eat? I was like, how many ingredients is it? And I would say 2 ingredients because, there's some things that are like the food and water or the food and salt. And I go, no, if it has more than 2 ingredients, don't eat it. And so many people, like probably 95% of people could not even start there. And I'm like, so why would we go through all of this for you to have like shopping lists and for you to go through and like start making food and like start weighing your food and prepping your food and try and stay when you can't even do something that's like basic.
Yeah.
Like, so that's, yeah,
Well,
I totally understand that.
yeah, reading that label, like people don't know how to read that label at all. I mean, they look at the calories and that is it, right? And it's like, well, there's so much that goes into even one calorie, you know what I mean? So you need to focus, look, and so the way that I do it with my clients is one of the first lessons is read an ingredient label, and that is your homework. Pick one, tell me why you picked it, tell me what's in the ingredients. This is what it should look like, what it shouldn't look like. If you don't want to read it, then there's no reason to eat it. Like all of these things, right? And I teach them how to read that. And that's their homework. And then from there, eventually later on, like weeks later, when we start getting into macros, then I teach them about the calories and the protein and the fat and the carbohydrates, right? Right now, we want to just learn what is in the food that you're eating, and then we can focus on everything else. I mean, and if I just jump straight into carnivore with my clients, that'd be easy, right? But a lot of them don't want to yet. They're still kind of like on the fence about like, red meat causes diabetes, and like fat is going to give me heart attacks, and like, all these things that I have to like shoo away like flies, the things that they're listening to, and kind of try to reframe their mind. And so paleo is a great place to start. And then I find that they easily transition to keto or carnivore.
And I've heard that a lot. So for anybody listening, I think that's an absolutely fantastic point. If you don't know where to start, like talk to somebody, like hire somebody. Like the amount of information that you can learn just by somebody helping you along, it not only helps remove those doubts, because I had doubts starting too. Like I didn't think red meat was going to kill me, but I had doubts about not eating
Fiber.
vegetables, right? Yeah, all this stuff. I'm like, I don't know, like I've done this a really long time, and like I've tried to make myself like get at least some vegetables. So no matter how much experience you have, you're doing something new, you're gonna need something, and whether that's finding somebody that you really trust, which is hard these days, right? It's hard to find somebody that you believe everything they say.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I think that's a fantastic point. So for anybody who has more questions, like wants to get in touch with you, how do they find you? What social media platforms are you on?
Right. So mainly Instagram at Paleo Lola. And then that's the first place you're going to find me. And then, of course, Isabel at paleolola.com is my email, and that is where they can email me. However, if you go on Instagram at Paleolola, my link will take you to my calendar, and it's easy to get a hold of me there too, or just DM me.
And I would highly recommend you guys follow her. I followed you for a while. Always love the stuff that you put out. Love the talks that you have on your walks or your runs or all of that stuff. Yeah, no, highly entertaining. You can learn a lot. Isabel, I very much appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks.
It was a pleasure. Everybody go check her out. For everybody that has listened, hit that like button, subscribe, comment, leave a review. Thank you guys very much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.